afterwards so you don't
No problem.
miss all your notification settings.
I think we're good to go. All right. All right, everybody. So I am not going to read Dr. O's nice, long, impressive bio because it got sent to you all, and I hate sitting at a talk while somebody reads my bio. I find it very uncomfortable. If you would like me to read your bio, I will, but I just find it makes my stomach hurt.
I can't say yes after that.
No, you can't.
Read it all.
You should, but you know, there's a reason we send these, and there's a reason he's here is to talk and not listen to me read something. So this is obviously a little different than some of the other, well, it's different than all the other talks that we've had this semester. Each talk is unique, but we're really doing something not quite as technically focused on an individual project. But the reason that we're doing this today is to really think more broadly about the work that you do and what things that you take for granted as you're solving problems in healthcare, or frankly, as you're doing anything in your work. And so how do we think more broadly and inclusively? Also, I just knew Fermi was going to give an awesome talk and I wanted an excuse to sit and chat. So we've been working together for what, 18 months now, and we've met in person once at a football game because this is Michigan. So anyway, you can share as much background as you want. You can read your bio. I'm just not going to make you sit there while I read it. So let's all thank Dr. O for coming up from Central Campus and finding this place, among other things, and then everything else he has to contribute today. Make them talk.
Will.
They will.
So
Thank
can
you.
this, can I put this monitor on this seat next to you? Does it go down there?
Oh, sorry.
Possible? I can't,
It's heavy.
I can't see the other half of the class. There you go.
Oh, lay it down. Gotcha.
Does that work?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Otherwise, I would have forgotten all of you this whole time.
It's a different view for me as well.
All right. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
So as she said, I'm Fermi, Dr. O. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm a middle-aged Black man with brown skin, short black hair. I've got dark rimmed glasses and a clear transparent face mask. I've got a wooden bow tie, a gray vest, and I'm wearing a collared shirt with a tie on. And I'm in a manual wheelchair as I identify as a wheelchair user. I'm currently the director of student accessibility and accommodation services here at Michigan, which means that I run services for students with disabilities, the testing accommodation centers, and the adaptive sports and fitness program. I'm also an assistant professor of family medicine, physical medicine and rehabilitation, and urology here, and I'm an adjunct assistant professor of orthopedic surgery at UCLA. So nice to be here with you. And as Amy said, you know, I actually don't like giving talks. Now, anybody that knows me will say that's a bold-faced lie because you love talking. And I was like, no, I didn't say I don't like talking. I said I don't like giving talks. What I like to do is start conversations. So I really do hope that today will be a conversation. There are no right answers. This is just something that each and every one of you already does have your own perspective and opinions and thoughts on this topic, whether you know you do or not. And so if my voice is the only voice we hear, I've done a disservice to all of you, right? Because this is a class that you're all taking. And if I come in here and talk at you as if I know what you need, then I don't think that's the right way, right? So if instead we can have a conversation about a topic and I can just lend my perspective, I'm just an N of one, which doesn't mean that my perspective is better than your perspective. And if anything, I should be learning more from you all than you learn from me, because there's so many more perspectives in the class than mine alone, right? I just have my lived experience and the experiences I've had that then have sort of tailored the work that I do. But each one of you is in this class for a reason, right? I don't know what the reason is. Maybe it was a class you needed for your major, you don't want to take it anyway, but you had to. Or maybe you saw something in it that you were like, I really like this class. Or maybe she just like rang your arm, just like she rang my arm to come and talk to take the class. Who knows? Amy can be very convincing, so I don't know why you're here. But I mean it because, you know, this to me, I get excited about doing this stuff. And, you know, we came to do it in person because for the past 18 months, most of what we've done has been remote. And it's not as easy to engage with people. Like I'm looking at, you know, Samuel and Jacqueline and Gavin and Wayne, and their cameras are off. I'm sure they're there, maybe not. Who knows what they're doing, but it's fine. You're okay. You don't have to have your camera on. But it's harder to engage with people that way. So, but I really do want this to be a comfortable conversation. You're not being tested on this by me. I don't know if you're being tested from them or not, but for me, this is just a conversation. So did we get to send out sort of the pre, I didn't send you guys any like hard stuff, but did anybody get to see any of the clips that were sent? All right, good. So that's what I want to start with, honestly, right? Because I don't know why you all think I'm here, right? I know why I was invited. I know what they put on the little summary thing, but I have no idea what that means to you all and what you expect to hear today, right? So when I talk about giving presentations, and what I did before we had all the COVID stuff in person, is that everyone gets evaluated on what they do, right? But how can you get evaluated on what you do if you don't even know what you're doing it for, right? If you're not sure what is supposed to be delivered, how can you then get evaluated on how you delivered it? So who wants to just tell me, what did you think you were going to hear about after seeing what was sent and then watching any of the things that you may or may not have watched? I'm not going to ask people if you did watch it, so it's okay if you didn't watch it. And for that's the Amy answer. So if you didn't watch it, then hopefully at the end of this, you will then be encouraged to go watch it afterwards. And if you did watch it, I might ask someone who feels comfortable sort of giving a synopsis of the things that they saw, not to test you, but because look, I've been a student, I'm still a student, we're lifelong students. And when you're having a conversation in a class and you didn't do the work beforehand, it's hard to then participate. And I don't want to out anybody that didn't do it beforehand. But what I do want is for everyone to be able to participate. And so if someone that did see it is comfortable sort of giving a synopsis, then somebody else can then hear from that. So the first video, which was the first one, the disability community one. So who wants to kind of just give a synopsis on what that first video sort of talked about? And then I'll go to my other question of what did you expect to hear after we kind of do a little level set. So I see you nodding your head.
Yeah. So if I think I'm thinking of the same one that you're referring to, it was sort of a high level overview from, I think, like the DC Department of something, I don't remember the name, about how to, I guess, more inclusively engage with people with disabilities in your workplace, or, you know, I guess anywhere that you would encounter people with disabilities, sort of, I guess, dispelling maybe like common myths, or thinking about people first, thinking about people with disabilities as people first, and, you know, not as their disability itself. Making sure that you ask them like if they need help before offering help, or those sorts of things. Yeah.
Can you all hear that on Zoom? I'm happy to give a summary for each person, but I don't know if okay, people can hear. Awesome. If you cannot hear the people, I will repeat, but if you guys can hear things, I'm not going to repeat stuff all day long. Now, this one was the cartoon one, right?
I don't believe so, no.
Which one was the first one? Because
This started in the elevator.
oh, that one.
Yeah.
Okay, so that one was cool. That one was cool. So essentially what this one was a guy walked into an elevator and there was a person sitting in a wheelchair next to them and somebody with a white cane on the other side. And he walked in and he kind of like patted the person in the wheelchair, and then to the person that was blind, he was like, hello, right? And then it went through sort of a series of how people with disabilities are no different than people without disabilities. And as he talked about, sort of person first. So see that person first, as opposed to a person with a disability. So there's another one that I sometimes send out, and maybe I sent this with the second one. The second one was Stella Young, right? Okay, so there's a third one that I sometimes send that I'll kind of give a summary of, and this one's pretty cool. It's a world in which everybody is a wheelchair user. And so of course, and this one I think would have been particularly good for you all, but I'll give the summary. Everybody's a wheelchair user in this community. And so the buildings are smaller, the doors are shorter, right? And like the doors are wider and everything is made so that people that navigate in a wheelchair can get around. One day, some people that don't use wheelchairs come into the community and they're these able-bodied folks. Then they start talking about the problems of the able-bodied, because what happens is the able-bodied folks, you can tell who they are because they all have a big knot on their head from every time they like walk through a doorway or stand up in a low building, they get a knot on their head, right? So what people did was they all came together and had these meetings to say, how are we going to support these able-bodied people? And they decided, you know what, we need to give them helmets because they keep on knocking their head against the ceiling. So that they can avoid doing that, let's get helmets to protect their heads. Then we made these braces for them to then have them be in a sort of a bent position at the waist because all these buildings are way too short for them. And so instead they said, oh, well, they should have these braces, but then force them to walk like this throughout the entire community. And one day these able-bodied folks are like, wait a minute, there's nothing wrong with us. Why are they giving us helmets? Why are they giving us these braces to walk like hunched over? Why don't they, God forbid, make the ceilings higher, right? Why don't they change the built environment to then accommodate us as opposed to making us feel like something is wrong with us? And so it's this really funny, unfortunately not always funny, way to look at it, because that's what we do for people with disabilities. People come into a space that was not built with them in mind, and rather than people then adjusting the lived environment to then fit everyone that comes into it, they then pathologize whatever it is that those people have, and then they expect that they are going to adjust in some way to fit in that environment. And so I sometimes send that video too, because I think that one, especially for people that are like fixers, we all have this desire to fix things, right? But when you look at the problem and you see it from the wrong, in my perspective, the wrong vantage point, you think about the problem differently and you see a solution that is not really the appropriate solution. Rather than addressing something that you can change, we address the things that are sort of just natural to the person. And so disabled body minds, right, are not things that this world was built for. And so rather than pathologizing the people, we need to address the fact that we can change the lived environment and the built environment to make it more accessible. And so that's kind of why I start trying to show some of those things. And I showed the Stella Young one, because the Stella Young one, and unfortunately Stella Young has passed away since she gave that TED Talk, but Stella Young, actually I talked too much. So someone else who saw the Stella Young one, who wants to kind of summarize the TED Talk that I sent you guys. Oh, sure.
I'm gonna, if I make myself uncomfortable and ask something provocative, maybe it will make it a little easier for everyone else to be provocative. So, and I'm asking this in a very genuine, I've known you for a while, open to learning. Stella basically talked about inspiration porn, saying that someone with disabilities does something amazing is exploitative and offensive. And then the next video was this inspirational story of someone who overcame tremendous obstacles to do something great. Reconcile that for me.
Absolutely. So what was the second video you're talking about?
There was a video of you, right? And I struggle with that. And I think I've come to some resolution, but I don't want to share the resolution I've come to. I want to hear your resolution.
And I'm going to then punt that right back, right? To say that if you all saw the third one that she's talking about, which was a 12-minute sort of teaser. So there's a film that's currently being made about me, and that was the teaser to the film. So you guys can see it, but don't like go sharing that link publicly because it's in production right now. But you guys can watch that. You can share with your friends and family. Don't just go putting it on TikTok or YouTube or anything. So I would love to actually start there then, right? Because that is a provocative question. And it's one that I would love to hear how you may reconcile with it if you saw both of them. Because I put those two things there for a reason. I know what the teaser looked like, and I know what Stella Young says. I haven't told you all what my perspective is on things, but I would love to. So it sounds like Amy is struggling to reconcile with those two, and it seems like two different narratives. And so how do you think about that when you saw that? To go back to the very, very first question I asked of, what did you expect to hear when you, one, saw that I was coming, and then two, got the pre-work? Each person probably came in here saying, all right, we're going to hear from some guy that's going to say blah. So whether you saw everything or not, now that we've had some conversation, I don't know anyone's name, so I apologize for pointing, but you that's sitting like this.
I don't think I'm on the email list, so I didn't really know at all.
Oh, yeah. So let's clarify a little level setting. There are students in the room who are taking this as a 4-credit course who have pre-readings and so on. There are audience members. So maybe we can talk a little bit for 30 seconds about what the notion of inspiration porn is. And then we can talk a little bit about your video so that people have some level setting.
For sure. Thank you for that. So, and I will, like I said, since none of this is meant to single people out, I don't want to make people uncomfortable. So I'll give some of my own answers to sort of level set too. So inspiration porn, as this individual in her TED Talk spoke about, was about the fact that, so she is an individual living with disability. She is in a power wheelchair. As you can see, she's small stature. When you look at her, you can tell that she lives with physical disabilities. And she talks about how I am not your inspiration. And so she says, when I would be with my family in the grocery store, someone would be like, oh my goodness, it's just so inspiring to see you here. And her parents would be like, what? Stella didn't even make her bed this morning. What are you talking about? She's an inspiration. No, she's not, right? Because people think, oh, for you being out and about and doing these things must be so difficult. It's just, I'm inspired by you and your presence and being here. And so that's what sort of the inspiration porn is. It's essentially it's exploiting another individual for your pleasure, right? You are the one that feels better for saying, oh, thank you for being here, you're such an inspiration. And it's something that they did that then is almost like a performative act for you to say, wow, look at all you've been able to accomplish, you're so inspirational, right? But then the other film, the other video that she then saw was a film that's the teaser about my life. Not having read the entire sort of my life story for you guys, but in summary, I'm from Nigeria, came to this country. Both my parents were physicians. You know, we moved to Maryland first, where my parents redid their residency training at Howard, Georgetown, and Johns Hopkins. We then moved to Indiana, where I went to elementary school at a private elementary school in South Bend. I went to Deerfield Academy for high school, where I played all the sports, was the leader of the different groups, president of my class, captain of teams, big brother, big sister. I sang, I danced, I acted. And then I went to Stanford for undergrad, where I continued doing many of those things and continued playing sports. I was the captain of the track team for my last 2 seasons, was academic All-American, and considered taking time off to train for the Olympics. But my Nigerian parents had sort of different plans for me, and I went directly to med school here. And so I love medicine. It wasn't that I wasn't going to do that, but I liked sports too, and I was thinking about sort of how far I could go there. So I came to medical school here, did all 4 years of med school here, and then I matched into orthopedic surgery residency at Yale. And it was in my 3rd year of orthopedic surgery residency that I experienced a spinal cord injury, which paralyzed me from my chest down, and I had minimal use of my upper extremities. I had 2 surgeries at Yale, then I went to Chicago for inpatient rehab. While I was in inpatient rehab, I saw some return of motor function in my lower extremities, and that kind of changed the trajectory of my recovery. I was introduced to adaptive sports while I was in inpatient rehab, which are sports designed for people with disabilities, but the way that I promote them is adaptive sports, just sports that allow everybody to participate together. And so then learned about adaptive sports, went back to Indiana, got a master's degree at Notre Dame in engineering, science, and technology entrepreneurship. While there, I worked on sort of creating solutions to problems with people with disabilities. And then I got another residency program in family medicine and worked on the St. Joseph County Board of Health, appointed by former Mayor Pete Buttigieg, now Secretary of the Department of Transportation, who's a good friend of mine, went to elementary school with me, goes to church with me, and then came back here to then be on faculty in family medicine and physical medicine and rehab. In my first role, I was the director of medical student programs in our Office for Health Equity and Inclusion. And now I have the role that I talked about earlier. I also do some stuff nationally. I'm on this White House Leadership Roundtable for Health Equity. I run disability sort of, advocacy work for the Association of American Medical Colleges. I sit on the Council for Medical Legislation and a couple other things. So those were the 2 films that she's talking about. And she's trying to say, well, that sounds like it's an inspirational story, yet you're telling me that I'm not allowed to say you're inspiring. What do we do there? So that's kind of like a summary of some of the stuff that was sent out and the videos that were there. So that's kind of providing a little bit more of a foundation without me trying to read my whole bio, which I eventually kind of did. Because the other thing is that sometimes I like to talk to you without you knowing all that. Because I tell people, I don't want you to listen to me because you know who I am and you now think that I'm someone worth listening to, right? I want you to listen to me because I'm someone here just like any one of you. And each one of us should then have the ability to then respect one another and listen to one another. And I actually don't think that education is this top-down thing where it has to be the person in the front of the classroom that's teaching you, that each of us can like work with and learn from one another. So it doesn't always work, since usually when you get invited to speak, people know, all right, they invited someone to speak for some reason. But I sometimes like to act like I just rolled in here off the street and let's talk. Like, how would you treat me if I actually just rolled in here off the street and was like, let's have a conversation and let's talk about things. But now that you know, okay, this person has done these things, you are going to think about it in a slightly different way. You are going to sort of listen to my words in a different way, but I don't want that to be the reason you listen to me, because I don't know anything about any one of you other than you're in this class, and I'm going to listen to you, right? I'm not going to make every single one of you give me your life story, but I know you each have a life story. Each and every one of you has some set of experiences that have gotten you to this point that are going to then flavor the way you do your work and the way that you see the world. And that's unique to every single one of you, right? So I can't possibly fathom all of the experiences that you have had, but I know that they're going to influence the way you think about these things. And that's how, especially when you have this, Center for Healthcare, CHEPS, Center for Healthcare Engineering and Patient Safety. Like, I didn't even know about CHEPS until she told me about it, right? And I looked it up and I was like, what is this? You know what I mean? And I still can't say I know everything about what you all do here. So as you're sitting here with the new Chief Transformation Officer for the University of Michigan, you all are lucky to then have someone like that in a program like this. And so I am curious, actually, as we go further along, to hear what is it that you all plan to do with your education, right? What is it that CHEPS sort of stands for to you? Because I am excited about the types of things that you all may be able to go out and do. And having this conversation is just one type of conversation that will hopefully add to the experience that you have, so that as you then go out and start to do the work that you do, perhaps this can influence it in some small way. So as I said, this is why I try to have conversations, because I didn't say I don't like talking, and I will talk the entire time if I don't give you guys an opportunity to. So I'm going to give you a get out of jail free card. And I'm going to ask one of the students who had to then look at stuff. I don't know who all the students are, but someone else to then say, all right, now with all of that, what did you expect to hear when you came into class today? I'm going to look at you just because you're right in front of me. And I feel like I've seen you nod your head a couple times.
Yeah, I kind of think what I thought.
And there's no wrong answer. There's no wrong answer. And you can even say, all right, this is what I may have thought, but now this is what I think, because then we've talked some. So just, what are you expecting now that we've done all that background?
I guess I was a little bit confused because the previous speakers have been about models that they've developed, and we went through their research, and so I was trying to figure out how your experience fit in with that.
Okay. All right. Anyone else? Because you could say, I have no idea what you were going to say, and I didn't think that this fit. And I was like, why do we have to come to this random session for something that is not actually going to be relevant to my work?
Just after watching the videos like you posted to us, I kind of sense that, okay, although I do not 100% sure what's going to go on today, I'm sure, okay, it's sort of something with disability people, and we're going to learn or see some perspectives of how should or these people with disability wanted to be treated, all those type of things. And as a student, maybe a student researcher, I do healthcare research. I want to do healthcare research, but I mean, I'm not from medical school. I do not have disease, but I really want to know the one who I work for, the one who we want to provide the service for, how they think that it's beneficial. So I really want to learn that, although like as the video said, that the people with disabilities, first they're people, they're not like say, won't be treated as a patient or some different, but I really want to know that how you guys or people with disabilities think that we can help them, or what's their objectives that we can use in engineering tools or quantitative tools to make their perspective better. If for me, I'm doing my research, I thought something is good for you guys, but it's maybe not actually the thing that really good for you guys. Especially I saw the first video, the open the door thing. I want to help, but like I make the lady fall on the ground. Then that's the things I really want to know how to improve or learn from the talk today.
So that was awesome. Thank you for that and for adding stuff in, because actually, so when I sent that video, I was looking for other ones and I just learned of that video recently. And I've given multiple talks using that example as something that happens to me, and I'd never seen it in a video. So when I saw that, I lost it. I was like, yes. So I walk with crutches. So the video he's talking about, there was a lady with a walker, or I don't remember if she had a walker or crutches or what, but she was opening a door. And as she opened the door, someone on the other side of the door wanted to help her. So they opened the door for her. She was balancing on the door though. So as they pulled the door open, she fell. So the way I usually tell this story is that, people come up to me and they ask if they can help me with the door. I say, no, thank you. And then I eventually, like with my crutches or walker, I will start to push the door open as I'm balancing. And then inevitably someone will come and push the door open, and then I will stumble and they'll say, thank goodness you got there. That young man was going to fall. And I was like, no, I was perfectly fine until you took my stability away, right? And so, and I actually, I had a little bit more of a emotional conversation in the same way a few weeks ago when I was coming back from a trip and I was getting off of the plane. And so I can walk, but when you watch me walking, you think I'm going to fall the entire time. And so I'm walking off of the airplane, and there's a lady behind me who also, she needs a wheelchair. I'm getting off the plane to get into my own personal chair, and she has a chair that's coming for her. But if you've flown, you see the little things that they cart people around in that don't have wheels that you can propel yourself on. You just kind of like sit on. It looks like essentially 2 planks of wood with maybe some rubber on it, and then they push you around. And so I don't need that, right? There's nothing wrong with that, but like I don't need that. So I was walking off the plane, ready to get into my own personal chair, and there's a lady behind me who was waiting for that chair because they were going to wheel her around the airport. And so I'm getting off the plane and someone's like, oh, sir, can we help you? I was like, nope, thanks, I'm fine. I'm making my way, like, sir, can we help? I was like, nope, I'm fine. And then they put their hands on me. So didn't say anything at the time, but they put their hands on me and like guided me down into that chair. And I don't usually say this, I don't usually say anything, but I paused and I said, you know what? I'm a national disability advocate. And I just want to teach you something that when you ask someone for help, I'm okay with you asking if I need help. But when I say no, you listen. So when someone says no, you do not touch them. And so then this is where I went into an example that is also a real life example, but hopefully doesn't happen much. I said, if I were in the bathroom stall next to you fidgeting with my zipper, would you reach your hand over and like zip my zipper up for me? I sure hope not. You know what I mean? And so it seems silly, but just because I look like I'm struggling doesn't mean you have right to put your hands on me now. Now, I'm even more emotional about this story because the reason that my chair wasn't there was because they broke my chair. And so when I got to baggage claim, my chair was all jacked up and my chair gets damaged often, but this was the worst my chair has ever been damaged. And it was damaged such that it was not reparable, right? So luckily this was on the way back from a trip to Turkey. I was in Detroit. I have multiple wheelchairs. And so as long as I could get to my car, I was gonna be able to drive home and get into one of my other devices, but not everybody has multiple devices, right? And so this ended up becoming a more frustrating experience because one, the airline damaged my wheelchair. So talking about healthcare engineering and patient safety, one thing that one of you could be the ones to fix is figure out how they can get wheelchairs safely in and out of planes. Because there's no reason why I give my wheelchair away and then it comes back damaged. And the thing is, people put their animals into planes. Like, what are you doing to the animal? Like, if my wheelchair can look like that, what's happening to Scruffy? I'm serious. Like, what is it that we're doing such that you damage chairs in that way? So anyway, so man, I'm so far off topic now because I'm just talking. But the goal, at least for me, I'll tell you that when I looked at this, what I thought was that based on what CHEPS is, based on the work that you all do, as you said, there might be things that you think you're doing to then help people. And it's interesting, and this is not picking on you, but I like how you kept on saying it. You kept on saying, you guys, you guys, you guys, right? I mean, I don't think I'm any different than you, and I don't know who you guys are, right? So one of the things I tell people is, why is it we categorize and judge based on what people can't do, right? I am so many things that an individual with a disability is just one of them. And so one of the things I want us to do is to not sort of other and separate the disability community as if we are doing something for them, right? And in terms of engineering as well, one of the phrases that I use is that everyone can use the ramp while not everyone can use the stairs. So that analogy is to say that sometimes a solution that you may have thought about for a particular group of people benefits more people than that as well. And so when you come up with solutions, we want solutions that are going to help the most. And so what people see is when we talk about accessibility and inaccessibility of spaces, people first think about it just for someone with a disability. And unfortunately, the disability community is by definition a minority community because it's not the majority. And so especially when it comes to finances and resources, too often people then say, well, this is too expensive to then make that change for this group of people. What's going to be the ROI on actually then like developing this product? Or do we have enough, what's the total accessible market that we're going to be trying to make it for? And what are we trying to then what's the value proposition to the people that we're making this product for? And if there aren't enough people, then we're not going to do it, right? And that's what usually happens. And that's not an inappropriate way to think about things if you're thinking about it from I have a product that I need to put to market and what is going to be the value in doing this, which is the reason why I don't want it to be a us and them. Because if we recognize that the solutions we come up with are going to help more than just this small population of individuals, perhaps we'll put more effort into finding reasonable solutions that benefit more people, right? Because too often we treat disability as this other, and we don't recognize that the things that the community needs are things that will be able to be sort of accessible to more people. So I talk about, the parent pushing a stroller, the person coming in with UPS or FedEx delivery, or the person in a walker or a wheelchair. That ramp will benefit more people. So why is it that we only have stairs, right? And so if there's a building that only has a staircase, then we need to figure out why that's the case. And then the other part that I bring up is the sort of the personal part. The ramp shouldn't be leading to the freight elevator where the garbage comes in and out, which is where things are often, right? And so the way that I usually get into lots of buildings is not the way that everybody else gets in, because the afterthought of an accessible entrance is somewhere else where they really did only think about it for the people coming in with freight. And they didn't think that somebody that was going to be coming into the building to then have the same experience that people walking into the front of this building should have, get to have as well. And so that is sort of context in terms of what this conversation could be. is to start by saying, you know what, let's not say what do they need, right? It's what do we need as a society, and we want to see everybody as part of that society. Now, to get to Amy's question more directly, inspiration porn versus someone that's inspirational, right? So personally, and this is, sometimes I like a little tongue in cheek, I tell people that I don't want you to be inspired by me based on just the fact that I roll up in here with a wheelchair, right? It's like, oh man, he's here. But what I do say to people is that hopefully once you hear a little bit about me, you will be inspired. No, right? But it's okay to then be inspired by something. And so that's why for me, I listen to Stella Young's podcast. And what I take from it though is that you don't ever know why you are inspiring to someone else. You know what I mean? And so even her podcast and how she said it, who knows if the person that saw you out in the grocery store that day, that's inspired by you being here, is inspired because for them, they're battling with depression and it was really hard for them to get out of bed that day. And they barely made it to the grocery store themselves. And so they still may look at you and think, I don't even have a physical disability, right? But I have a mental health disability and I know how hard it has been for me. So I can only imagine if it were even hard for me to then move around, perhaps that, right? Because a lot of times, most times, people do it from a positive, right? They're not trying to be negative when they say that you inspire them. But I think that what I tell people is that it's usually from people lowering the bar, right? Because when you don't expect much from people, you then are inspired by them doing much less. And so I'll let that sit for a second, right? When you don't expect much from people, you are inspired by them doing much less. If you expected that people would be in the same places with you, be able to do the same things, it wouldn't be inspirational to see your neighbor that you see all the time at the grocery store if you don't think that they're having a difficult time getting to the grocery store, right? But what this leads to the systemic sort of, ableism that exists in our society, such that you realize that someone who has a physical disability likely had a harder time getting to the same place that you did, which means that you recognize inaccessibility of our spaces, because it shouldn't be harder for them to get to the places that they need to get to. But the fact that we recognize that it probably did take them more to get there is acknowledging the fact that the way that they used to get there was not accessible because we don't have accessible means. So for me, the inspiration conversation is one that's very nuanced. And I personally, because I know myself, if you had been inspired by the next video, I would say that's okay, right? But I would say, let's challenge the reason why you were inspired. And is it only because this person did this stuff with a disability? Or is it because this is an accomplished individual, regardless of disability, but that disability might give it a little asterisk and say, man, and if they did all that post-disability too, given how inaccessible this world is, that makes it more impressive to me, right? Because look, I don't want to no longer have an opportunity to then be impressive for people. Like, I don't think that being disabled now negates the opportunity for me to bring back. That sucks. Like, that's not fair. So for me, it is a very interesting sort of juxtaposition to say, well, then how should we do that? And the thing that sort of gets to your question, one of the things I tell people is, and as a physician, I even say, so how am I ever going to know what my patients want? Or how are you ever going to know what anybody wants? How do you find that out? Before you answer, clearly, we're going to do a randomized controlled trial. We're going to get a whole bunch of people. We're going to assess it, and then we're going to figure out what they want, right? Like, that's the way we do it. How else could you figure out what people want? What? God forbid. But right? Ask people. So I'm sure many of you have heard the phrase, nothing about us without us, right? Which is a lot of different sort of minoritized groups have used it, but the disability community uses it a lot. Nothing about us without us, which means don't come up with solutions for things that you think are for us without including the us in the solution, right? If you think that you're coming into a space to then fix things, to create something, and you don't include the people that you're then creating it for, and not just in a way to say, hey, we identified a problem that exists in your community, like the video I described to you, right? Of the people that lived in a community that was all chair users. And then the ambulatory folks showed up and they were all of a sudden the problem, right? If you'd included them in the beginning, they might've been like, hey, why are your ceilings so short? And they're like, well, because why would we have 20 feet ceilings? We can't change the light bulbs ever if we do that. So we have like, oh, well, it makes it hard for us to then get into your building. So do you think that there might be a way that we can maybe make the ceilings a little higher? No, that makes sense, right? I mean, their idea was, oh, let's come up with a helmet and a brace, which we think, this is going to help them. They need to be down at our level. They need to see things the way we see them. They need to live the way we live, right? All these conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion Someone recently really challenged me with that. And they said, you know, this inclusion really just means assimilation. We're not allowing people to bring themselves into these spaces. We're saying that you have to change yourself to fit the norm that the space is in, and that's how you'll be accepted. And so for disability, I know this is going to be like, wow, this isn't even really disability anymore. That's because this is a conversation not specific to disability necessarily. I utilize disability as sort of the vehicle to have that conversation because throughout my life, disability has been the one thing that has made me feel more other than anything else. And that's despite being a Black man my entire life living in this country, right? It's the disability that has made people literally and figuratively keep me out of spaces that I felt like I was qualified and deserved to be in. And so that's the part that I use that sort of as that gateway conversation to thinking about, well, who else is excluded? What other things are we not thinking about when we come up with solutions, right? What voices should be at the table that we're not listening to? And it can't just be a homogenous group of people that all have the same lived experience, because that's not going to reflect the population that you're trying to serve and the population that's going to be impacted by the solutions that you're putting together. And then depending on the space I'm in, if I talk to like a group of business folk, I say, look, think about the people that you're missing. Think about that untapped market of people that are not going to come get your product because they don't see themselves in your product and sort of your product development. They don't see the fact that you considered their needs and their wants and what you did, and you came up with these solutions that don't address them. And so they're never going to patronize your establishment or your business if they can see that you didn't take them into consideration. If they can see that when they look at the work that you do, it does not address the needs that they have. It does not have anyone that sounds, thinks, looks, acts, feels like them in the work that you do. And so from a business perspective, you will do better in business if you then address the needs of more diverse communities. And disability for me is the sort of ubiquitous thread that then anyone could enter this space at any time. It's not that I'm like wishing disability upon you all, right? But this is the thing that any one of us could then have at any point, right? And the fact that not all disabilities are visible. And so we have invisible, non-apparent disabilities that then those things lead to the lived experiences people have with the products that we put together. And so how do we do a better job of making sure that as we're coming up with solutions, we identify what the actual problems are? Were you trying to get your hand up, Amy?
Yeah, I wanna ask a fairly specific question to challenge you a little bit in thinking about this group. And one of the things I'm taking away that I like very much is I'm processing not only the sort of physical, visible disability versus say a mental health issue or something that is unseen or less obvious. You brought up the issue of race. We've talked about, you know, sort of this broad notion of inclusivity. So can we spend a few minutes on your healthcare experiences, and in particular, thinking of you as both a physician as a patient? Presumably most hospitals, but I'm willing to bet not all, have wide enough hallways that a wheelchair can get through, that you as a patient could go in and see your doctor and you could get into the building with your wheelchair. I'm willing to bet that there are clinics where that's not the case, or the dentist or whatever. Beyond the sort of obvious physical, you know, the issue of a wheelchair and ramps, what are some of the things that you see where, you know, so we've got students who are working on problems scheduling people going to get care. We have students working on problems about triaging access. We have students working on projects about sort of a diverse set of operational problems in healthcare. What are the things that we're potentially missing that we're, you know, and to give an example, we've talked about problems outside of the disability space, about things like there's a great project in prenatal care where you get 14 prenatal visits. And for me as a affluent sort of self-enabled individual, that was kind of cool. I went in, I could see his heartbeat. It was kind of a nice little treat. If I was making minimum wage working at Kroger and I took 2 buses to get to the doctor's office, going in so that someone could spend 10 minutes saying you're fine, would actually be pretty limited. And so for that project to recognize that, oh, there is a population of patients for whom we are not providing optimal care because there is something other than their immediate medical need in that case that we're disregarding. So that was a long way of asking, what should we be thinking about when we're thinking about problems in terms of people getting care in our system?
So I'll first touch on, you said, besides the obvious physical, And I even say that the obvious physical is not always even accessible. And that's something that from a patient and a provider standpoint, I recognize that. So we don't have a healthcare system that then anticipates or assumes that the physician themselves may have any sort of access need. So it's actually been more difficult as a physician to be able to do my work because sure, the clinic space that's patient facing might be accessible, but then on the physician side, on the clinician side, on the healthcare provider side, it's not. And to me, that was hilarious because it's like, wait, we understand the incidence and the prevalence of these things that we're treating, taking care of. But why then do we then say that these people are then not going to be able to then be healthcare providers as well, right? And so the healthcare system is actually not built with disability in mind. And then that does leak into the rest of our spaces. So hospitals are not actually the most accessible. And people think about physical alone, but there's been a group of us that have been working together since we've been here to make the COVID initially testing and then eventually vaccine sites accessible. Because accessibility, people just think about wheeling up to it. But we don't talk about the different languages that people may speak when they come to get their test. We don't think about people that might be blind or low vision, right? So there are lots of other ways of making things accessible that people didn't think about. And sure, the physical access is really important. But even when we talk about physical access, to kind of go along those lines, Amy, one of the things we talked about was where are we putting our vaccine and our testing sites? And is it only in a place where people that then can drive there are going to be able to get there? Do we know where the bus line is? And do we make sure that people that take public transportation will be able to get to the bus route? We talked about all these telehealth things that everyone was super excited about telehealth being a way that we were able to access more people. But the number of people that don't have iPads or iPhones or phones, right? People that don't have Wi-Fi and broadband internet in their homes. So these are the types of things that it's not that, and I'm really careful, right? Because it's not that as you think about these things, you're bad or you're wrong for thinking about a solution that involves Wi-Fi or people driving, because you're still going to get people that can drive and that have Wi-Fi. So that's okay. But if we assume that every single person has a resource that not everybody has, we then haven't included everyone in those spaces, right? And so when we start to think about this, and this is the part where it's tricky, right? Because when I say what things should you think about, it's hard to think about something that you haven't had to. So I'll use myself as the example. Prior to living on ice, as I say, on both sides of the stethoscope, I did not understand how sort of inaccessible the world was to disability. And I took care of patients with disabilities myself as an orthopedic surgery resident. So it's tough to be able to sort of give specific answers for the things that you should be looking for. And so what I try to do instead is sort of change your mindset to recognize that you need to know that there are things that you are not thinking about. And so if you only limit your discussions to people that have the same experience as you are unlikely to then get to the point of asking those right questions. And so part of this is, unfortunately, outside of your immediate control, because if you're at a place, and this is going to be a bigger sort of institutional issue, but if you're at a place that then is not diverse and doesn't have people with different lived experiences in your jurisdiction, in your area, you are not going to then organically communicate with people that then have different perspectives as you, right? And just once again, using disability as the example, if you don't have an individual with a disability that they can disclose, right, in your space, having these conversations, you may not see the physical inaccessibility of a space, right? If you don't have presentations and conversations where people will then talk about the invisible or non-apparent disabilities and how those will then impact people's access, you won't recognize that those are things you should think about, right? So I personally, because this is not my academic work, I'm very careful not to sort of put myself out as some leader or some expert, because a lot of people do dedicate their lives to this work. But what I try to do is I try to come in and have conversations about the things that we are missing just because we never were exposed to them. Because one of my statements is that the past may not be your fault, but the future will be. So as soon as you are then exposed and introduced to something that you may not have seen before, what are you then going to do about trying to make sure that somebody's tomorrow is better than their yesterday? So for each of you, specifically to answer Amy's question again, what should you be thinking about? You should think about the fact that no matter what solution you come up with, there's someone that's probably still not being served by that solution. And let's then ask people, who do we think is missing from this solution? Right? You've come up with something, and I'm sure it's great for what you've done. But then even when you're done, you stop and you look at that again and you say, okay, is this going to be accessible to someone who is low vision? Is this going to be something that someone who is, deaf will be able to access? Is someone who may have a mobility disability going to be able to utilize this? At least those are things that you can start to do that. But then the broader part of it is truly coming from surrounding yourself with people that have different experiences, which is why I said it's a broader institutional conversation, because if you don't have people in your classes that have different experiences, if you don't have people in your community that you are interacting with, it's hard to then get those other than having sort of formal experiences such as this, which is why I'm humbled and honored that she invited me. But it's something that, when I get going, it gets me frustrated at times though, right? Because what this also does, and this is not what Amy is doing, but it also tokenizes people, right? Because it shouldn't be the one person with a disability that ends up bringing up these types of things. There should be other people that then recognize that this is important in order for that to happen, right? And unfortunately, when we look around our country, it doesn't always happen, right? Let's think about something that's easier. If you've got a building full of men that are coming up with the plan, should they need a woman there to then be able to say, we should probably have, this is another longer conversation because there's more to what I'm going to say, but should there be a woman in the room to say we should probably have a women's bathroom as we build this building? Shouldn't need a woman there, right? But guess what? Now, of course, we're doing a better job even of saying we need to have more than just gender binary bathrooms in the spaces that we're in, because people have different gender identities. But at the same time, it shouldn't take someone who then identifies as non-binary to then push that issue, because people should be cognizant of the fact that there are people that identify with having different genders right now today. That is not news. And so you shouldn't require having that person be the token spokesperson for the group to say, let's think about this when we create solutions, right? So that's the type of conversation where we're getting better by having a sort of more diverse and inclusive conversations. But people are aware of these things existing. But what they don't do is, when it's not something that you identify with directly, it doesn't become sort of front of mind such that when you're thinking of things, you always bring them up. So there's this sort of balancing act of not wanting to be tokenized and bringing someone in that then is the only sort of disability voice you've heard. But it's also kind of the tax of, well, if that person doesn't say it, how are we going to get to the point where people know it? And so we do want to balance that by saying we want to invite people that can lend that experience to the conversation, but then hopefully that creates a ripple effect such that now each and every one of you in each space you go to, once again, I'm not going to say that you have to claim to be the expert, because I'm still not claiming to be the expert. But in the space that you go, you could be that person to then bring up issues of accessibility, because like, hey, listen, I don't know all the answers here, but I saw this talk the other day and it just made me think about this in a different way. So perhaps we should think about this. And what that might do is that might have the people in the audience that may not be as sort of vocal as me, they might like speak up and say, actually, you know what, I don't talk about this much, but I am deaf in this year. And so this has led me to do this, that, and the other. Or someone else might say, well, you know what, my sister or my cousin or my friend, and they will start bringing up the things that they've seen in their own lived experience, whether it's them themselves or someone they've been with. And that leads to that robust conversation that then gets you to the best product at the end of the day. And so I don't know if that's a cop-out answer, because it's tough to give like a specific, because when I give specifics, people write that down. I mean, I'm serious, like this has happened where I'll give a talk and someone will literally write down what I said, and then they'll go and they'll do it to somebody else, like Dr. O, and I'll get an angry message. You told us that we should do this and this and this when we see one of the disableds. And I saw disabled yesterday and I did this and they were mad at me. And I say, well, you know what? When you meet one person with a disability, you've met one person with a disability. And so this is not something that you take and you then apply in the same way to every single person that you see. Same way with gender, with race, with ethnicity, with religion. You cannot take this conversation and say, I'm going to apply every single thing exactly the way he said it, but you add this to your repertoire of sort of context that you use to then be able to then apply that to the way that you address problems, right? That's the way that I want to do this. Just challenge the way you think and the way you look at problems. Because I'll be honest, when I got my master's degree at Notre Dame, I didn't look at problems the same way before, right? And then when I looked at problems after that degree, it gave me this way of saying, I see solutions in the problems that I look for. And I'll even be honest in that it was much after that that I started to recognize my own biases and how I was looking at these solutions. Because even as an individual with a disability, I only have my own lived experience. And so I probably early on was probably too sort of confident in my ability to come up with solutions for the community, right? And that same video that you saw There's a lady by the name of Judy Heumann, who I'll ask you guys to look her up later. Judy Heumann, Heumann. Anyone heard of the movie Crip Camp yet? Oh, this is up. So you have? Have you heard of it? Have you seen it?
Yeah.
You've seen it.
My older sister's friend from college actually was an assistant to Judy Heumann a couple years ago.
Awesome. So Judy Heuman's incredible. Till I kind of give you a quick who Judy Heumann is. This is the way I describe her. Judy Heumann is to disability rights, and I mean this. I'm not just being sort of exaggerating this conversation. Judy Heumann is to disability rights as Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King together are for civil rights for Black people. Just being very honest, because the work that she has done was pioneering the work that led to the Americans with Disabilities Act. And she literally she protested, she went to legislature, she did a lot of work, not by herself, a lot of other people. But if you look Judy Heumann up in this movie, Crip Camp, you'll watch it. So Judy has become sort of a friend over the past couple of years. And Judy saw the same trailer that you guys saw. And we had a conversation afterwards because the Obamas actually were executive producers for Crip Camp. And Judy was trying to get me in touch with them to then get them to support the movie, because she's trying to like make my movie like the next disability movement. Anyway, so she watched it and she's like, you know what? If I didn't know you before I watched this, I don't know if I would have wanted to, and I don't know if I would have liked you. I was like, wait, what? Like, what, Judy? And this is Judy Heumann, right? And so I was like, wait, why, Judy? Like, why would you say what did I do wrong? And she said, it was just really macho and all this sort of huffing and puffing and like lifting weights and walking and all this focus on your recovery. And she was like, why is walking that big of a deal? She's like, I'm glad that you like got that back, but what does that say to people that don't regain that? What does that say to people that never could do that? So here you have an opportunity to be sort of this voice for the disability community. And you yourself are sort of touting this ableist mindset that the reason that you have then regained this ability to be successful is because you've regained your ability to walk. And that's what we should be excited about. That's what we should be inspired about. She's like, I think that, she's like, if I didn't know you, I would have seen you just like any other one of these ableist folks that's perpetuating the ills that we're trying to change. She's like, but I know you. So I know that that's not what you're trying to do. And I was like, yeah, no, that's definitely not what we're trying to do. I mean, who put that movie together? So, but it helped me, right? Because at that point, I wasn't seeing it that way. But now as I look at it through the perspective that she has painted for me, I changed the way that I sort of propose things. But I'll tell you, I still grapple with this because I'm a physician. I'm an orthopedic surgeon. And I say, listen, why is there a problem with wanting to fix certain things? Is there a problem if I then wanted to regain my function and wanted to get to walk again? Should I be just okay using a wheelchair the rest of my life because some people can't? I don't have to change that, right? So, but it's important to then tread carefully there, because while I still want to be able to sort of optimize function, I don't want to then make it seem as though that is the only way that people are valued, right? So that is something that we can do, is not making it seem like without this device, without this ability, you are no longer important, right? But if someone desires the ability to do X, Y, Z, they should have the access to being able to do so. So that's another sort of thing to then like think about as you go through and create things, is do not make something that then makes it seem like if you don't have this, if you're not able to do this, you're less able or you're less important. And that's what sort of the structures have created, is they make it seem like there is this norm of what everyone should strive for. And if you don't get that, then you are less than. So that's the thing that sort of Judy has done for me, because I started this by saying I don't go into spaces acting as if I'm the expert, because I just have, once again, my perspective, and I'm still adding other people's perspectives to it, which is changing the way that I sort of come up with what I think I'm doing, even within the community of which I identify, right? So to say I don't want it to be an us versus them type of thing, what can we do for them? I was even like, what can I do for us? And even in the us, I was seemingly messing it up. But I want to be careful in that, like, it's not messing it up, but it was failing to acknowledge the different perspectives that still exist within that community, right? So as much as I talk about DE&I and say that I'm all about inclusion, I was even sort of pushing something forward that didn't recognize the fact that not everybody with even my same disability type is going to then have the same perspective as I do on what it means to then provide solutions, or what the problems are, or how we should then be promoting it. So that's something that each of you, whether you identify with disability or not, as you are having these conversations, right? One of you might go on to be a disability expert in some way. One of you might study accessibility. So like, I don't know if you know the name Jenny Leigh Fleury. Jenny Leigh Fleury is the chief accessibility officer for Microsoft. And like right before this meeting, I had a meeting with Microsoft accessibility folks because I'm going to go give them a talk on accessibility stuff. But there are people that do this work, right? Like literally when you look at stuff like, when you look at your computer, all the accessibility features that exist in your computer or your iPhone, I am not an expert in that stuff. I mean it. We have all sorts of things that you guys might not even know exist, all the haptic feedback that exists, all the different things that we can do on our phones, right? Like for example, I'm going to call Amy out again. Amy tweeted the other day and she was like, oh, I'm learning from Fermi in terms of, doing captions or alt text for her images. Do you guys know what alt text is yet? Some people may not, and it's okay. Yep. Flat Mountain was like, I'm not going to say anything, but I don't know what alt text is, which is fine. So alt text, when you put an image up on a tweet or on a Facebook picture or something, if you are blind or low vision, you don't see that picture, right? And so there's screen reader technology that then when I'm using Twitter on my iPhone and I go to a tweet, I'm not going to know what that tweet is if there's a picture there, right? But alt text is a way that within the image, you can add a description of what that image is. So when the screen reader is coming, it will say, tweet from Amy Cohn says, picture of Amy running in the snow with her dog, beautiful day outside in Ann Arbor, right? Whatever you decide to put in there. And so that's what allows someone who's using the screen reader to then come across it. So it's funny because your friend responded, I just liked your tweet and didn't actually answer. And so Amy put a description in the body of another tweet, which is also fine, right? Because the screen reader will go through and see that, but you can embed that alt text in the image. So when you put the image in, you click it, there'll be a little ALT thing usually in the corner. You click ALT, and then you can just put it in. Now, once again, showing my own colors. Early on in my sort of accessibility game, I was putting these things in, but then I wasn't seeing it. And I was like, wait a minute, I put this alt text, and it's not, and somebody was like, hey, Fermi, it doesn't pop up under the image like a caption. So you'll put it in and it's not going to show up, but other people that use screen readers will know it's there. And I was like, that makes sense. Because I started coming after other people because I would see an image, I'd be like, there's no alt text there. And you should have, and I was like, dude, if you use a screen reader, you notice the alt text is there because also the little alt thing that shows up doesn't show up when I look at somebody else's image, I'm not going to see a little thing that says ALT. So I thought that I had to click on that thing and that's how I know it's there. It doesn't show up that way. But when you use that technology, your technology will read over it. These are the types of things that, first of all, someone much smarter than me thought of, but those are the types of solutions that you all can create, right? What is the alt text equivalent to an image that we just don't have yet? What are the things that we can identify by working with people to say, if this thing existed, this would make life so much better for this entire population of people, which the person can describe to you what the barrier is, but it's going to take minds like yours to then come up with what the solution may be. So coming up with solutions is still something that I want to encourage you all to do. Looking at lived experiences of other people and trying to then factor them into those solutions is good, but include them in it as well. Not always for them to then come up with the answer, but for them to sort of share what that experience is. Right. And so I'll end with the last sort of a story I tell, which is another true story. So I did my ortho residency at Yale and I went back. I was invited to do grand rounds and I was in the audience, kind of like this, sitting in front of the folks talking about where I was at that point in my life. And orthopedics is a very physically demanding specialty. And so some of the people I know for a fact looked at me and thought, I don't know if we would match him into our program now. Right. And so I pointed out to one of the faculty, and one of the faculty told me a story about his son. So at that point, his son was in first grade or something, and his homework was color the circle blue. And his son was colorblind. And he said that, for weeks, he went home and was like, I don't know how my son is getting his homework done because it says color the circle blue and he's colorblind. So one day he finally asked his son, was like, Jimmy, your homework says color the circle blue. How are you getting this done? And his son looked at him with this perplexed look and said, Dad, I never use crayons that aren't labeled. So sometimes simple solution to something we look at and we see this as a barrier and something that's super difficult. Like, how is this little boy gonna color the pencil stuff? And because someone was like, hey, why don't we just put a little wrapper on these crayons and say, this one is blue, right? that might be the solution. And that sounds like, a silly little answer, but it's things like that we still have lots of solutions that we can create, right? There are lots of things that are so obvious to some, but not obvious to others that aren't even asking those questions. And you all can then go out and figure out what some of these answers are, but you're gonna have to ask the people sort of what that barrier may be. You can think about some of them yourselves, but by including more people with a diverse set of experiences and backgrounds and perspectives, you'll then be able to factor in those problems into the way that you create the solutions that we'll have for tomorrow. So I know you guys have the rest of class. I don't know if we want to pause for actual Q&A, but I told you I'll talk the whole time if you give me the chance to. So
I think what I'd like to do is, first of all,